亲爱的读者朋友们，我是杨莹，然后呢，我在网上的名字叫屠龙的胭脂井。今天呢，我采访了《照亮破碎之心》的作者 Dr. Karl Deisseroth，然后他也是光遗传这个非常著名的技术的发明人。那我今天跟他讨论的问题呢，就是他这本新书。这本新书，我觉得是我从事脑科学行业以来看的最有趣的一本书。为什么说它是最有趣的一本书呢？以他的学术地位，他在斯坦福发明了光遗传，他可以写一本非常学术向的、非常技术向的书。但是他选择不这样写，他把这本书写成了一个又一个故事，把所有的精神类的疾病，所有的大脑的疾病都用故事去呈现。在你读这些故事的过程中，你就会发现，哦，原来大脑是这样运作的。你可以通过大脑会怎么得病来看出来大脑是怎么行使它的功能的。同时，在我们的访谈中，他也非常详细的论述这些疾病都是因为我们的大脑在进化的过程中被推到了自然的极限。在很短的一段演化时期，我们人类大脑不论从体积、形态还是功能上，都是非常爆发式的进化。在这个爆发式进化的过程中，有很多基因，比如说自闭症的基因，当它没有达到疾病的程度的时候，是帮助我们人类思考的。所以说，有很多得了大脑或者精神疾病的人，这些人是为我们这整个的种群的演化和大发展承担了很多我们种群的负担。所以这个是我们对整个精神疾病的理解。在这个过程中，他也讲了光遗传是怎么能够通过改变一些大脑这个细胞的基因，来帮助我们非常精确的测量大脑中的这些通路，以及我们人类的一些复杂的行为，比如说吃饭呀，比如说给幼儿喂食啊，很多的这些行为是怎么进行的。所以我觉得它是一本非常有意思的书，是一本即便你不是脑科学行业、生物学行业，或者是这个精神病行业，你也能读懂的一本书。同时，你对人性有非常深刻的理解，所以我觉得它是一本非常有趣的书。而且，如果你想了解人性的话，你就要从一个研究底层精神疾病的科学家的这个嘴里来看这些故事。希望大家能够像我喜欢这本书一样，像我欣赏这本书一样，像我觉得它是一个有趣的书一样喜欢这本书。Hello, Dr. Deisseroth. And first of all, I would like to congratulate on your book. Because I read both the version and the Chinese version, I think it's beautifully written and it's very elegantly translated. So I want to congratulate you and the translators. Um, I would like to say that it's very much out of my expectation, because given your background, I thought it would be very sciencey, very scientific about advanced technology, but it's very humanity. It's composed of little stories. So I would like you to elaborate on that to our audience. Why do you think it's best to be written in stories, in human stories, rather than scientific terms?
That's a great question. And I'm really, first of all, so glad to be here talking with you about the book. And also, I'm so glad to hear that the translation was good. I have no way of knowing, but it means so much to hear that from you, and to know that the spirit of the book was also captured in the translation. So thank you for that. And yes, the style of the book was a bit of a risk for me, a bit of a step outside of the space I usually inhabit. And that was done for really two reasons. One is I found that I could convey the inner world of human beings more accurately if I could let myself be more literary about it and to use more freedom with the words and to capture, for example, in the chapter about bipolar disorder or mania, to really use the words that were pressured and intense and exuberant to capture the feeling of mania. And in this chapter on schizophrenia, to have things fragmented and loose and tangential and to capture the inner workings that way. And so for me, it was in some ways the only good strategy to convey even the science of psychiatry was to tell it from the point of view of the patient's inner subjective world. And so that's why that was the first main reason I took that strategy, because even though not conventionally scientific, in my view, it was more accurate because it let me convey what was going on inside more fully. And the other reason was I find you can communicate better with human stories. I think I wanted to reach everybody. I didn't want to just reach scientists. Everybody's touched by mental health. It's our common heritage to have things go well and go not well in the mental health domain. We have friends, we have family, we have ourselves. I wanted to communicate with everybody, and I didn't want to just have scientists or academics be able to read it. And so that was the other reason. Just telling human stories, I think, allows everybody to connect.
It's very interesting because mental health and mental disorder, there's no way of describing the symptoms, to average person. If we have a fever, it's very easy to describe a fever, the temperature rising up. And there's no like physical measure for mental disorder. Do you agree?
I agree. And the only way to understand it is to feel it. There's right in psychiatry, we have nothing to measure. We there are no blood tests, there are no imaging studies, and although we have quantifiable measures, it's all questionnaires, it's all verbal assessments, which of course are subjective in many ways. And so at the very heart of it all, the only way to communicate the essence of these human inner states is to make or help somebody else feel the same thing. And that's hard, right? Because if you think about
Yeah.
all the other states that people can enter into, not easy to help other people experience them. But with words, with literary writing, I hoped to achieve that.
Thank you. So I would like to diverge our question a little bit about your personal experience. So I read that you were very interested in poems and creative writing early on. And then you were interested in the ideas of cells and trained in neurosurgery. And you loved neurosurgery. And you said in your own words, I'm quoting you, it's invigorating the attention and the precision needed to conduct a neurosurgery. And then you wrote, you never could have thought of choosing psychiatry as your specialty. But one encounter with a patient changed your life, and you felt a union of science and art in one moment. And you said it brought intellectual life fully together for the first time. And I would like you to talk a little bit about your calling, because we have a lot of young audience, college students, graduate students, about how do you find your calling, your moment, and your career transitions.
Yes. Well, this is such an interesting thing to talk about, and it matters so much for the young people to hear that your true calling might not be clear to you for some time, but then it can become very clear. The only way to get to that moment, though, is with human experience. You have to put yourself into the moments and the places where that can come to you, that information, that meaning, that calling can come to you. So I had always loved reading and poetry. I loved how words could make me feel different and surprising ways, that a few words could cause an emotion in me. I loved that. I loved writing. I loved thinking about how that worked. And then I became interested in science, and I became interested in I thought a quite separate thing. I became interested in the precision of science and the 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 biology of the brain. I was very curious, as a biologist might be, as to how the physical brain was working. But those were separate for me, and I didn't think they would come together. I didn't think I'd be able to approach these questions of how words create emotion as part of my life's work. So I was headed down the pure science medicine path, and I loved neurosurgery because it was so precise and powerful. You could do amazing things. You could help people in extremes of illness and dysfunction, and you could bring them back. And it was a wonderful thing. Something I realized later was that it didn't connect this other part of me, this love for words and emotion, and this question of how our inner subjective states are created, and how interaction with other people can control them, how a few simple well-chosen phrases can stir an emotion. I thought those were just separate. And then when I did my psychiatry training period during medical school, I was put into rooms with people who experienced emotion and the world in completely different ways, in stunningly different ways. Here were human beings who were physically intact. There was no blood test and no imaging test, no electrical measurement, nothing that you could do precisely would give any information about what was going on. And yet these people were so disordered. That people who first made me see this were patients suffering from what we call schizoaffective disorder. It's a mix of psychosis, which is a break from reality, and depression, which is a very severe discounting of positive value in anything, including one's own actions. And all of these are tied up together in one individual at one time. It's a terrible disorder. And I saw this happening in front of me, and I saw all these things come together. I saw the words and the emotion and the inner world of a human being who needed help. And yet I knew from my medicine and science training that the brain was composed of cells, electrical cells, that made and sent very precise electrical signals. And so for me in that moment, I realized I could bring these parts of my inspiration in life together in one thing, which was in psychiatry. So a totally unexpected turn of events, but and it never would have happened if I didn't have that personal face-to-face encounter with psychiatric patients. So important to put yourself out there, to experience things directly, to make the right decisions in life, I think.
So I have two questions following on that. So the first question is that when I was in graduate school learning about brain disorders, and they would give you a description of the prototypical type of patients and teach you about what is autism, what is schizophrenia, what is, the mania. And then years passed by, people began to say, oh, this is not enough. We need to have some mixture of symptoms and spectrum disorders. And I began to question, but I never say it aloud, but I began to question, do we really know the boundaries of different kinds of disorders, or is it just a way of grouping symptoms together? Do you have any comments on that?
Well, it's another great question. And this is another major theme of the book, which is I wanted to capture for everybody this basic question of why do mental illnesses exist in the human population? Is there a reason for it? Now, we know some diseases exist for a reason, believe it or not. You know, if you probably know about sickle cell anemia, for example. This is a blood disorder. It's terrible
Yeah.
if you have it, but it's definitely there for a reason, because people who have one mutant gene are much more resistant to malaria, and people who have two mutant genes are the ones who suffer. And so we know why this gene exists in the human population. And so then you have to think about psychiatry, and you have to ask the same question. Why are these disorders so prevalent? Are they at some level doing something for us? And what I tried to convey in the book, that in many cases, this is definitely true, that these disorders exist on a spectrum, and that many people, not to take anything away from the suffering, the true pain, the true dysfunction that many people with every psychiatric disorder have. However, because they exist on a spectrum, we can look at this and think, oh, there's probably a reason that these genes are persisting in the human population. And you can actually look at several major classes of psychiatric disorder. And if you look at the whole population, people with these, there are 3 psychiatric disorders at least for which this is true, known to be true. On average, people with these disorders do better than the general population in life. They have higher income, higher educational attainment, higher IQ. These 3 disorders are bipolar disorder, okay, anorexia, eating disorder, and autism. Not to say that there isn't terrible suffering at one end of the spectrum for all 3 of these, but as a whole, they actually do better than the general population. And so that makes you think also, these are here for a reason. And so part of the book tries to capture that evolutionary perspective, how the human family, as we know it today, emerged. What are we carrying within us that helps us now, or helps some of us now? And maybe even it's not something that's that helpful now, but maybe it was helpful in the past when we were evolving, and we're still carrying the trace of that forward. And so a major theme in the book is exactly what you articulated so well, is where do you draw the line? You can draw the line for illness today, but that might not have been where you would draw the line 1,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago. And even today, if the situation changes, if the world changes, that line between illness and health could move. So I think it's an important realization. I think it helps us be more empathetic to people who are suffering, because we know that there's a reason that they're suffering, and they're carrying a burden in some ways for us, for the rest of the human family.
So do you think that our human brain is pushing sort of evolutionarily pushing the limits of nature, that because we have this giant brain that consumes very little energy and do a lot of computing, that that we are pushing some boundaries of nature in the intelligence that give us some genes that can be potentially give some of us mental illness?
I think it's very likely that the rapid growth of our brain, which has taken enormous quantum leaps forward in size in a very short evolutionary time,
Yeah.
I'm quite sure that that was not an easy thing, and I'm quite sure that not all the problems have been solved with that. We know, for example, that in schizophrenia, where people have a break from reality, they express this break from reality in different ways. Sometimes they can hear voices in their head that are distressing. Sometimes they can feel as though part of their body is not their own. If they move their hand, they may feel like something else is controlling it. And if you look at all the symptoms of schizophrenia, they seem to have a theme, which is that one part of the brain doesn't know what another part of the brain is doing. There's a problem in communication across the brain. And so, for example, these voices that people with schizophrenia hear, very often they have the quality of a running commentary on the world. They'll be experiencing a voice commenting on, oh, that guy is looking at me funny. You should do something about that. Or and oh, if that you should punch that guy in the face. He's really annoying. Now, we all have these thoughts all the time, of course, but we know.
Yeah, it's like inner speech, right? The normal inner speech.
Yes, and we're not surprised or perturbed by it because we know it's our own inner thoughts. Now, suppose you didn't know that it was your own inner thoughts, and suppose it was as if it was being inserted into your brain. That would be very distressing. And so that's kind of what the situation is with schizophrenia, is this not good long-range communication across this enormous brain that we have. And one part of the brain doesn't know, is not warned, is not looped in to the plan, and it creates a lot of confusion and very bizarre perceptions. And so I do think there are other examples of that in other psychiatric disorders, but I think the rapid growth of the human brain is pushing the limits in many ways.
Yeah. So that comes to, that topic comes to your book title, Projection. And, some audiences are outside neuroscience. Or mental disorders or psychiatry, could you explain projection to these readers?
So the title, it's very in English, it's a very short and simple title because projections has a number of different connotations in English that all work together very well. I know that's not the case in every language. In fact, even in the United Kingdom, even though they speak English there, projections didn't have the full set of connotations there, so they changed the title to connections instead of projections. But that said, everything can be expressed in the following way, which is under the single word projections. And so I'll explain that a little bit. First, a projection is what neuroscientists call the communication, the physical path of communication from one part of the brain to another, because the cells that live in one part of the brain, they receive very long, thin connections or projections that come from the other side of the brain that are like telephone wires that or Ethernet cables or fiber optics. They have very long, thin structures, and information is sent down them. But like any...
Yeah, it's white matter. I would like to... Yeah, white matter in the brain.
Yes, it's the white matter. Exactly right. That's where the projections are. And that's how one part of the brain tells another part of the brain what it's doing. And it's those long-range connections that are not doing the job fully in schizophrenia, for example. So that's one meaning of the word projection. It's a neuroscience term, and and the science is supporting this. This is very important for defining what our inner states are, what experience do we wrap into the perception of the self in the moment? Is it our body? Is it our principles, our priorities, our memories, our sense of self, our perception of the world? We're not conscious of everything all at once. We pick some things to be wrapped up and bound into the mental state of the moment, and that's controlled by projections. A part of the brain goes out and grabs different perceptions and brings them together and makes them active together, and that defines the moments that we have in life. Okay, that's one meaning of projections, but of course, it's a rich term in connotation. Projection is a word used in psychiatry a lot to convey this interpersonal aspect of communication. Very often in social interactions, it's so important to make a model of the other person in your mind because there's so many complexities. You don't know what another person's priorities are, what they want, what they don't want, what they're afraid of.
Right.
It's very hard to have a normal interaction if you're not constantly modeling or imagining what the other person is thinking. Right?
So like my mental model of you and your mental model of me, and my mental model of you trying to communicate with me, and how do I react? So
Exactly.
that's the second.
That's the
Yeah.
second meaning is projection. Basically, what it is you create a model of the other person knowing what you know about yourself. I'm a human being. I know I have certain structures. I look at you, you're a human being. I'm going to project myself into you, and I'm going to say, okay, let's at least have this as a hypothesis that you're somewhat like me, and I'm
Mhm.
going to use this as a map of sorts of to help me predict what you're going to do. And I may also look at what you do, and I may bring that into me, and I may think, okay, this is something that I should compare to myself, and maybe that'll help me understand myself better. And so, when in psychiatry, when people have what's called a projection, they are using their own feelings and they're attributing them to somebody else. Sometimes this is a healthy thing. Sometimes this actually helps you understand somebody better. Now, sometimes you're wrong about that too, and so projections can become misleading. And this is something in psychiatry we teach people to be aware of. It's okay to do this, but you should be aware you're doing it because the projection can be a problem as well.
So even in normal people, that if your projection of the other person is so out of your expectation, that their feelings and their values and their standpoint are so different from yours, you would feel so frustrated as well.
Yes, that's right. And so that can be a source of friction and a
Mhm.
source of anger. But what we try to do as psychiatrists is we try to tell people to recognize those moments where you feel that
Mhm.
anger, where you feel that frustration, and to use it to realize, oh, yeah, something's not matching here. Why? Oh, it's because I did a projection, but it's not mapping exactly right. And so it's this difference that's making me angry. The projection maybe needs to be morphed a little bit to make it work very well. And so you can use the anger as a way to actually improve your understanding and your empathy.
That's really great point. I mean, it's very meaningful to all of us because it has. I experienced so much frustration um, with mostly people online that I couldn't communicate with them, and
Right.
I don't know what they're thinking behind their comments. And some of the comments are so out of this world. But I guess I need to bring this awareness that they don't have the same projection as I have.
Yes.
And of course, yeah. And also, it's very interesting because we talked about the translation of the book. I mean, there are so many layers of translation in this book. Um, One layer is the language translation, that our Chinese audience are reading your book in a different language. And another layer is the translation of feeling into stories in the mental disorder. And I when I was in graduate school, I think because I did a lot of language translation in the brain processing, and I think it's very interesting because different languages map different concepts. Like the translation equivalents are not completely concept equivalents. So they have translation equivalents in the dictionary, but there's a minor difference between how they map the words in the human brain. And also, maybe there are some ambiguities in the storytelling, like they are feeling something, you're touching their feeling, and you project their mental state, and then you're trying to use analogies and stories to tell us how they feel. So there are a lot of ambiguities in this book. And maybe in psychiatry as well. How do you feel about that, and how do you like deal with that in your research?
Yeah, I inhabit this strange space where my research is very precise. We control the action of brain cells with millisecond precision. We turn them on or off. We make precise measurements of activity of many cells and control them. And we make quantitative computational models. And all that is one part of my world. And then the other part of my world are these very subjective and imprecise, interpersonal methods of communication. And what I have found is what helps me to help make sense of this is to realize that the interpersonal interaction and the use of language, if done right, is a very precise tool. It's a way of making a measurement and providing and collecting information that is actually astonishingly precise if used well, if used carefully, and if it gets to the human being, if it gets to not just a download of information, but if it gets to the heart of the person, then it can be the most precise tool you can imagine if it's done well. And so there's a certain people talk about the art of psychiatry or the art of therapy. And it is a bit of an art, but it's also a bit of a science because it's so important to use the right word, to convey the right emotion. Only then do you actually get the right information back. And in some key stories in the book, I try to convey this. There are moments when I realize I haven't been taking the right strategy. I haven't been collecting information in the right way. I haven't made myself open enough or vulnerable enough to allow the other person to communicate with me, or I haven't allowed enough space or enough time for them. And so a lot of the book is conveying my own journey, realizing how precise words actually can be. And that's, for me, it's been a lifelong, ongoing voyage of discovery.
You were talking about the precision of measuring the cellular level electricity in the neuron. So I would like you to talk about the technology of optogenetics. So to our readers, since you invented the optogenetic technology, how do you connect the light to the electricity at cellular level so they can get a sense about the idea?
Yeah. Well, this is a very important part of the book too, because I wanted to convey to the general public not only the essence of psychiatric illness, the inner states experienced by human beings, but I wanted to convey also what the current state of the science was, which has been very exciting. It's actually helping us to understand these inner states very deeply. And one thing that's allowed this to happen is a technology that we developed at Stanford called optogenetics. And what this is a way of using light, but not in the way you usually think about light. So normally we think about light as a way of collecting information. We're observing, and light brings information. What optogenetics is, it uses light to make things happen, to cause individual cells, individual types of neuron to be active or to be shut off. We can turn them on or off using light in the brains of behaving, living, moving, fighting, defending, drinking, eating animals, including human beings, by the way, but also fish and rats and monkeys and you name it. So it's a technology for turning cells on or off with light. And that's so important for the following reason. The brain is electrical. Everything, all the communications that are sent between cells are electrical, and every neuron is fundamentally an electrical device. But that is a problem to study them, because if you put in an electrode into the brain and you send current in, it will stimulate all the cells, every single brain cell. no matter what the job of that cell is. And the brain as a whole, it's like stimulating a computer. You can't just put an electrode into a computer and send in current and expect anything to happen. Why? Because the computer's beautifully designed. It's got an incredible array of elements that are all small and sensitive and intertwined, and they send connections to each other. And they're all electrical, so you'll get nothing reasonable to happen if you just
measuring by perturbing it. If you
have to perturb it, but you want to perturb it precisely. You want to perturb it in a meaningful way. Okay, so if we can't use electricity to perturb it in a meaningful way, what could we do? Well, one thing we thought was none of the brain cells respond to light normally inside the brain. It's very dark in there. There's no reason for any brain cell to be light responsive. But we thought that's great, because if we could then use a trick to make some of the cells respond to light, that would be a big difference. We'd have most of the cells not responding at all to light, and a few of them responding to light, and that difference would give us the precision that we wanted. Okay, so how do you do that? How do you make some cells that respond to light? Well, we took a gene, a bit of DNA from a plant, a very special kind of algae that is a free-swimming algae. It's a single cell, but it has flagella, so it can swim through the water. And it tries to find the right level of light to photosynthesize and to survive. And it does this with a very special protein called a channel rhodopsin. And what this is, it's a single biomolecule, a single protein, and it sits in the surface of cells. So you might have one of them right here. And it sits in the membrane of the cell, and if a photon of light hits it, it opens up a little pore, a little hole, and ions, charged particles, go across the membrane of the cell, which is electricity. If you move charged particles, that's what electrical current is. So basically, this was a way of delivering a single gene that would give the cells that got it the ability to turn light into electricity. And that is the essence of optogenetics. And so we used genetic tricks. So we only gave this gene to some cells, but not others. And then we used fiber optics to send in light. And only the cells that had the DNA got electrical current from the light, because only they had this protein that turned light into electrical current. And then that way we could turn some cells on, but not others. And then we could very systematically go through the brain and turn cells on or off, depending on how we were doing it, and see what behaviors happened. What did the animals do? A lot of this work initially was done in mice. We found cells that control hunger and thirst, and maternal behavior, nurturing behavior, aggression, fighting, defensive behavior, motivation, and so relevant to questions like depression. Where does the will to act come from? The belief that actions might be useful or meaningful. That we found cells that control that. Relevant to autism, we found cells that control social behavior. Relevant to anorexia, we find the cells that intersect social drives and feeding drives. And we found social cells that inhibit feeding. And so we found this whole set of cells that we knew could cause very, very important internal states and very, very important psychiatry relevant behaviors. And that's optogenetics. It gave us, and I wanted to share that with the general audience too of the book, because it also helps us understand and it helps us empathize. All our actions, all our perceptions, our feelings, they come from the activity, the electrical activity of a few kinds of cells in our brain. And it's so helpful for people to realize, if you're looking at somebody and they're acting in a way that you don't like, they're being too aggressive or too passive, not to take anything away from personal responsibility and the idea that people can change, but still, the reason they're acting the way they are, there are some cells in their brain that are well-defined, specific physical cells that are sending particular signals that cause them to act in a particular way. So it's an important insight. It helps us realize how physical we are, how biological our drives, our motivations, and our feelings really are.
So let me check if I understand you correctly. So basically, optical genetics is a way of sending the light controlling the cells so that by genetically engineer some of the neurons just by a few genes or one gene that it can respond to the light. And then you can use the light to control these cells, and then they can be turned on and off by experimental design so that you can turn on and off a lot of important neural pathways, including eating, feeding, maternal behavior, etc., so that we can study all these complex neural activities by this little light.
That's exactly right. You got
it. Okay, so by talking about that, what do you think of brain stimulation in general? Because I did brain-computer interface, and when I went out of graduate school and I talked to, some of my friends and relatives, and I told them about brain-computer interface, they always ask me about brain stimulation. What do you think? Should we do that to, in common people's sense, do we do that to accelerate learning, to make us superhuman, or to suppress depression, to suppress bad feelings, to suppress fear? So, brain stimulation is a big mystery to a lot of people. So I would like to ask you, what do you think of brain stimulation?
Well, first of all, it's a very interesting technology, and it has helped many people. So if you take Parkinson's disease, for example, very serious illness, it can cause death. Many millions of people suffer from it. In people where medications have stopped working, you can insert an electrode in the brain into the parts of the brain that control movement. And about half of Parkinson's patients get major improvement with some of their symptoms for a pretty long period of time, can be many years, a decade or more. So it definitely helps many people. With Parkinson's, it also is helpful in some types of spasticity and tremor. It's helpful even in obsessive compulsive disorder. But it hasn't yet really been shown to be helpful for most psychiatric disorders. It doesn't, and for neurological disorders in general. In most cases, it's not helpful. It doesn't help with schizophrenia. It doesn't help with autism. It doesn't help with anorexia. We haven't figured out how to make it help for mania. We haven't figured out how to have it be helpful for PTSD or anxiety or for most depression patients. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that it's this electrical device that you're putting in. In most cases, that's not precise enough. You're just putting in current, and you're shifting the balance of things. Wherever you put the electrode in, you're stimulating or inhibiting all the cells that are near the electrode. And the only way that ever helps is if the essence of the disorder is very simple. If it's just an imbalance where one part of the brain is a little too active and another part of the brain is not active enough, and you can shift the balance, and then things can get better. I think what we're discovering is that for most things, it's more complex than that. There's more to it than just a balance shift. There's coding, there's information, there's complex interplays. It's like a symphony where it's not as if every musician can do the same thing at the same time. The real music comes because they do different things at different times.
So let's talk about your stories. So I think all of the stories must be your favorites. But if you can pick one story that is your favorite, number one favorite, what would that story be in your book?
Well, they each stir different emotions in me. The first chapter is really about grief and loss and depression, and that makes me sad. It's an important story. It's a human condition that we all share. The last chapter is about dementia and the loss of the self that comes with end of life neurodegenerative disease. That one also makes me sad. Um, but that's also important. I do love both those chapters for their importance. In some ways, I like the bipolar chapter the most, the one about mania. It's called First Break, and it's about a patient I had who was he was a retirement age gentleman. He'd never had a psychiatric disorder his entire life. Very successful business guy, and nobody in his family had ever had a psychiatric disorder either. But then this was right around the time of 9/11, and this
Oh,
was
I remember that one.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it was obviously a very, upsetting experience, which everybody, felt upset. There was grief, there was mourning, there was anger. But he had a very interesting thing happen to him. About 2 weeks after 9/11, he became bipolar. He had a manic episode. And this is a very clear change that can happen in some people with bipolar disorder. He gradually, over the course of about a week, entered into a new state of being where he was not needing to sleep, full of energy, full of positive emotion, full of hope, full of motivation, believing that he could do anything, that anything was possible, that he was important, that he could save the country, that he could save the world. And he started training. He was in his 60s. He started training to join the army. He was running through the canyons at night. He was, rappelling down from the roof of his house on ropes. He was reading about military strategy, and his whole life was transformed in this extremely energetic way. But then it became a problem. He wasn't sleeping. He started to have some thoughts that were not helpful. He became sort of hyper religious. He started yelling at his family. Uh, they didn't understand what he was doing, and he didn't understand why they didn't understand. And so it started to disrupt his whole family life. And it was at that point they brought him into the hospital. And we were able to treat him. I gave him a psychiatric medication, a mood stabilizer, and it over a period of time, it brought him back down to his normal state. But it made me think that story made me think so much about what psychiatric disorders really are and what mania specifically really was, and how it, in the right context, this would have been a good response if they're, a threat to the community, a need for people to enter into a new state of being, to defend the community, to defend the village, to believe that they could, against all odds, to think that they might be able to make something valuable happen. That's a pretty good thing to have in a time of crisis, right? And you could imagine if there are genes that allow that to happen, that those would do well in the human population for human evolution for some time. And so I like that story because it made me very clearly realize that we have to think carefully about what we call a disorder. Yes, it was a disorder for this guy. It was destroying his life. However, under the right set of circumstances, that would have been the exactly right response to have. And so I love that story because that patient, even in all his suffering, he made me realize this fundamental truth about psychiatric illness.
Yeah, so his own disorder might make him, under the right circumstances in history, to be a hero, right?
That's right. He could have become a great general, a savior of his tribe, of his family, of his community. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're approaching the end of this interview, but I would like to do traditional academia PI initiated thing. Like when we wrote funding, we want to address one question of our interest. So I would like to ask you to address one thing that of your interest. What would you like to say to the audience?
Well, I'm someone who, in the course of my work, I've always tried to help other people do their work better. I've tried to help bring my technology to other people to help them use it. And what I found is they've made discoveries that I couldn't have imagined. And for me, that's been incredibly rewarding for me. And it's made me realize that also the best way to communicate is through making your own vulnerabilities clear. And it's very important for me when I write the book is I didn't want it to just be an analysis of psychiatric patients. I thought that would be unfair to them, and so what I did in the book was I also revealed some of my own frailties, things, experiences I had that bordered on psychiatric illness, and sharing those experiences I thought was just as important as sharing our technologies, but in different ways. Sharing technologies helped other people do their work, but sharing my own weaknesses, I think, makes people connect more deeply with the stories. It's not as if I'm saying that here are some people who have some illnesses. Let's think about how they operate differently. I'm saying we're all flawed. We're all disordered in some way or another, myself included. The human family is disordered. We're the humanity, from some perspective, has weaknesses. We have as a family, we have flaws, and healing comes from admitting that and sharing that and talking about it openly, without barriers, without judgment, so we can understand each other better. And so I'd like to just share that as something that I learned in life, but also in writing the book, that it helps us to be honest about our own frailties, our own flaws, and deep understanding of each other comes from that.
Thank you very much. I would like to presenting my fans and all my audience to thank you for your time and your great comments on your book. And I would like to congratulate on your book again. And I would like to talk to my audience about your book. And it's fantastic and it's a great read. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a real delight talking with you, and happy to talk again if we ever have a chance. So thank you again.
Thank you. Bye bye.